Hello, it's Kate here, and welcome back to those of you who joined me for the very first Mosse on a Monday, and hello to those of you who are joining me for the first time. It's very simple. First Monday of every month, I choose 2 non-fiction books and 2 novels that I love. That's all. Some of them will be very old books that I've had on my shelves for a very long time. Others will be slightly newer, but they'll all be available if you want to read them and share them with other people. One of the things that I found really difficult, again, was trying to decide which books to choose because there are so many fantastic books. But I wanted to do something a little bit festive to finish with because it is December after all, and further down the line I will be doing a special Christmas edition, so watch this space and I'll put information on the channel about when that's going to happen. But let's get going. So book number 1 is Val McDermid, Common Murder. Here it is. This is an old women's press edition, which I've had for a very long time. It's all falling to pieces. It's now published and available by HarperCollins, so you'll be able to get a new edition. So Val McDermid has published this year a new novel called 1979, and the lead character is a Glaswegian journalist called Ali Burns, and it reminded me of how much I loved Val McDermid's early crime fiction before she became the superstar queen of tartan noir and the queen of crime, which she absolutely is now. So this story is set at a fictional place, which is Greenham Common, really. It's called Brownlow Common, but it's based on Greenham Common. And it's set in the early 80s. And for those of you who are younger than me, you might not know that Greenham Common was the site of a women's peace camp. There were nuclear warheads that Ronald Reagan's government had put there. And it's not really even about whether you agree with nuclear weaponry or nuclear power or any of those kind of things. The point was that these missiles were on British soil, but they were in the hands of America. So if you like, it's a story about sovereignty and who gets to decide what our country is used for. And it was an enormous thing, and many of us feminists of that generation, of course there were proper peace camps and they all had different colour gates and people lived there, but then a lot of other people would go and visit, and it was a very enormous part of feminism and campaigning and activism in the early 80s. And that's one of the reasons I love this book. It took me back to being there and what it felt like at the time. So the story is very straightforward, that Lindsay Gordon, who we first met in Report for Murder, is called to Greenham Common. An ex-lover of hers, Debora, has been accused of assaulting the chairman of the local village group that is opposing the women's peace camp in this fictional Greenham Common, Brownlow Common. But quickly it turns into something much darker, and Rupert Crabtree is found murdered, and of course Debs is the key suspect. Out of that, Val McDermid does this fantastic crime story of many different suspects, all sorts of people with axes to grind. It's not quite as straightforward. The police, of course, think it's going to be something to do with Greenham Common, Brownlow Common, but there's actually many more irons in the fire. I love the book because it takes me back. I love the fact that there are no shortcuts because no mobile phones. So Lindsay Gordon, as a reporter, she's a Scottish reporter, she's now living in London, but she's originally from Glasgow. She has to run to a local phone box and, put the money in. You can hear the beeps when she's trying to file her copy. But it's actually a story, and it shouldn't be topical, about what happens if the security services and the police, who should be protecting the women at the police camp, are actually colluding with the powers that be to keep something completely covered up. So there's kidnapping, there's murder, there's security, there's espionage, there is a web of local politics underneath. But most of all, it's just a cracking good read, and the ending is absolutely genius. So if you love Val McDermid, if you love crime fiction, if you'd like to be taken back to the heady days of the 80s and that sort of idealism and what it meant, the politics of feminism, of sexual politics, and there's great sex in here as well, because Lindsay Gordon is in a relationship with Cordelia, but there's a lot of shadows from the past. You will love this book, so seek it out. It's called Common Murder, Val McDermid, one of her very earliest crime books, and then you can read all the many brilliant crime books that she's written since. I'm not sure if you can hear my dog pattering around the kitchen at the moment. He's extremely excited. Obviously, he's a big fan of crime fiction. So the next book, this was a difficult choice whether to include it this time, because it's actually a true crime book. It's how it's described. But in the end, I wanted to tell you about this book if you haven't heard of it. It is called Dancing with the Octopus, The Telling of a True Crime, and it's by an astonishing writer called Debora Harding, and it came out last year, published by Profile Books. So this is my proof copy. You know I'm always doing this to you. And this is what it says on the front. This book is a warning, a promise, a testament, an act of will, a work of art, a political protest, a radical work, a family memoir, a soul-bearing, an incantation, a mirror, a condemnation, an eyewitness account, a reflection on restorative justice, a balm to the soul, a defence of love, a true story. So the framework of the book is this, that when she was 14 years old, Debora Harding, and she lived in Omaha, she was going from school across the parking lot in 1978 to her church choir practice. She never got there. A man pulled up in a van. He abducted her at knife point. He threw her into the back of the van. He very seriously assaulted her. He tried to ransom her and then left her bound and tied in the snow to die, really. That is the true crime that is at the back of this book. Now you're probably thinking, why am I sharing this book? Because this sounds a very difficult book to be reading. But actually what the book is about is everything that happened after that, and everything that has made Debora Harding the person that she is. And there is a really difficult question at the heart of it, that was the most appalling thing to happen to a 14-year-old girl. But what if that was not actually the most traumatic part of her childhood? Because in the end, this is a story of an abusive relationship with her mother. It's a story of the way that she and her sisters were brought up and the way that her father looked away. It's the way in which the attack traumatized everything about her life and influenced everything about her life. And she says this, "They say with severe crimes, there's no avoiding the aftermath. What they don't say is how post-traumatic stress can become a disorder because of your childhood family, the one you're trying to survive. I will now tell you about my childhood. Do not be scared." She is a beautiful writer, and this is one of the things that lifts this from being a terrible and true story, but a story of a true crime, to something that approaching transcendent, beautiful literature. I've really never read anything like it. It is about restorative justice. It's about the fact that in 2003, at the age of 39, Debora Harding goes to meet the man who had attacked her and discovers, apart from anything else, that he was 17 at the time. It's about over the years, how her body held the trauma and the stress and little by little refused to hide it anymore. So the years that she could not speak, the moment at which she became paralysed and could not walk, the way in which the trauma worked upon her, everything about her, at the same time as her being incredibly successful. She's American, she was in America, she was working to get a senator elected. She came to England, she was a radio producer, she set up her own production company, she met and married an Englishman, had 2 children of her own. So it's the way in which the story and the memory and the trauma comes out. So the book goes backwards and forwards. It isn't linear because, of course, trauma isn't linear. Memory isn't linear. It is about restorative justice and about what that means. It's about the nature of love. It's about the nature of avoidance. It's about the nature of collusion and the ways in which families keep secrets and hold secrets. It's the way, I suppose, in which families gaslight. But for me, it is the story of the most incredible resilience. It's the story of the beauty and importance of words and language. It's the ways in which Debora Harding realises that writing this out will make a difference to being honest, finally, not protecting other people, being honest about what happens, and of course the consequence of her telling the story of her childhood, not just this one moment in the parking lot in 1978, but all the moments that had led up to that, and how her family react to what happens afterwards, the sense of it never being talked about again, or the suggestion that somehow it was her fault, all of these things. It's about feminism, it's about women's lives, but mostly it's about how humans are incredible, how they can heal. Beautifully written, lyrical, elegiac, and it finishes just at the end. I'm just going to read you a couple more words because I can't really tell you much about it because it's a book you have to experience as well as read. But Deborah Harding finishes, in writing the scenes in this book, I was reminded of how terrifying we humans can be when empathy ceases to exist. We are only as strong as the human connections we build. Fate doesn't arrive with a personal name, but we make our fates personal by our response to random events. And the last line in the book is, there is no need now to pretend. It's the most beautiful book, and it's full of hope, and it's uplifting for all of its very dark subject matter, and it just makes you feel, God, what a woman. And I can't wait to see what she's going to write next. Deborah Harding, Dancing with the Octopus, published by Profile. My second novel for today's show is the beautiful, prize-winning The Long Song by Andrea Levy. Now, I'm doing that thing that I promised I wouldn't do. I'm doing it to you again, which is that this is a special hardback proof. This is not what the book looks like in the shop, but you'll see the real jacket in a moment. It's available and published by Headline. Andrea Levy wrote this novel. It's her fifth and final novel. She was already battling breast cancer and died in 2018. But it is a testament to the power of writing and the power of somebody to completely tell a story that you kind of think you know, but with an utterly different lens. So The Long Song is set in Jamaica in the 19th century against the backdrop of the ending of slavery and the first years after slavery had ended. The backdrop, I suppose, is the Great Baptist War, as it's known, of 1831. The narrator is an old woman, July, and it takes the form of a memoir. And the first words in the proof copy I've got is these. You do not know me yet, but I am the narrator of this work. My son Thomas, who is printing this book, tells me it is customary at this place in a novel to give the reader a little taste of the story that is held within these pages. As your storyteller, I am to convey that this tale is set in Jamaica during the last turbulent years of slavery and the early years of freedom that followed. So the narrator, now an old woman, is July, and she is telling her story of being an enslaved girl and woman in a sugar plantation called Amity. Her mother is Kitty, and she has been stolen from her mother by Caroline Mortimer, a white slave owner who takes a fancy to the child July and takes her away and gives her a new name, Marguerite. It's the story of July's life in that household, the way in which the white families work, you know, the people who are good people versus the people who are very vile people, but all within the structure of enslavement and owning other human beings. It's a novel that has incredible vibrancy and colour about the life in the plantation, but it also is a novel of huge subtlety and complexity. It shies away from the easy narrative of this is good and this is bad and these people are terrible and these, you know, all of this kind of thing, and produces something much more complex. So July herself is unreliable as a narrator. Her son Thomas, who is a free man and very successful man and was born as the result of July's liaison with a free man, a former enslaved man. He is now very successful and he wants to publish this memoir of July. But what is lovely at the heart of that relationship is the story of he wants his mother to tell a particular story, the story of the end of slavery and the beginning of the free years. And it's not the story that July wants to tell, and it's not the way that she wants to tell it. Also in the story, there is her liaison with her owner, which of course there is no consent there. But at the same time, July wants to talk about that as a love affair. And the result of that, her child being born, who is very light-skinned. And within that, there is this terrible repetition of history, of this theft of her own child, losing both of her children, not being able to bring them up. But what I love about this novel, which makes it, I suppose, different from many of these kind of narratives possibly, is July herself is just the most extraordinary character. And because she is difficult, and because she won't, if you like, play the part that we expect from her, the narrator who is telling us this story, she is very slippery. She goes backwards and forwards. Her views of things are very singular. They are utterly her own. She is not prepared to have the mantle of history put onto her shoulders. And Andrea Levy writes this character so extraordinarily. There is complexity, there is shade in all of the characters in the novel. It is, of course, a story about the evils of enslavement. It's also a story about the complexities of abolition, because one of the key characters in the novel is Godwin. His name is actually Goodwin, but there is always this sense when the name is being said of Godwin, and the idea of, is he a good man? Is he playing God? He comes from a family that is passionate against ending enslavement. They are abolitionists, but at the heart of it there is a hypocrisy, because truthfully he doesn't treat the enslaved people and the people who then he frees with the same respect as he does treat his fellow white brothers and sisters as he thinks of them. So it's a novel that will tell you about a piece of history that you might not know, or you might know very well. You might have seen it been adapted for stage and for television, but go back to the original novel. I saw a stage version that will be running in London next year, if you can get to see it, at Sadler's Wells, and it just brought it back how much I wanted to read the novel again. And here it is, the long song, the great, very much missed Andrea Levy. She is a real voice for our times. She is one of the chroniclers of the 20th century, and here the chroniclers of the 19th century. So if you've not read it, you will never regret it. Beautiful, beautiful novel. So I'm now going to swap this beautiful hardback for another hardback, and this is the real cover. Now, it's December, Christmases are coming, so I felt that I really should finish on a book that is pure light and joy. And it is this. It is called Taste, and it is by the wonderful Stanley Tucci. So, you know Stanley Tucci. Films, The Hunger Games, The Devil Wears Prada, Supernova, Julie and Julia. The list of his credits is extraordinary. He is Hollywood royalty of the 20th and the 21st century. But did you also know, as well as being Hollywood royalty, he is a brilliant cook, a brilliant writer about food, and also somebody who puts everything about food at the heart of life. It's not an afterthought. It's not, the idea, you can't imagine him grabbing a bag of crisps or a sandwich. It would always be a proper meal. And this book is his story of love affair with food, actually, from all of his life, how it has been part of fundamentally who he is. So it starts in the 1960s in Westchester, upstate New York, with the young Stanley Tucci and his mother in the kitchen. And he is watching the television and his mother is ironing, and they start to have a conversation. He's a 6-year-old boy, he wants a snack. And are you hungry? No, I'm not really hungry. And everything about this opening chapter sets the tone for the book, which is witty and light and conversational, sometimes almost like a play. You really feel that you're sitting in the room with him, with his voice in your ear. And it goes through, essentially, how he grows up. It's a memoir, it's about his family life, Italian-American family. Everything is about food. He is such a witty and funny writer that the scenes, for example, about what happens almost every weekend when his parents go round to his granny's house, and at the end there'll be a kind of tussle over, no, you take it, you take this food, no, you brought this food, the kind of passive-aggressive work that's going on, the kitchen wars between his mother and his grandmother. And it takes us through how he became an actor, but the role of food all the way through. The book is full of recipes. both for food and also for drinks. Some of the food recipes are quite extraordinary, beautiful dishes of pasta, cooking a suckling pig. There's also a very important, and this is coming up for Christmas, timpano, which is a family thing that happens at Christmas. I can't tell you anything more about it other than Stanley Tucci's first wife, Kate, who died of breast cancer, and his second wife, Felicity Blunt, who is a literary agent, both can't bear the timpano, and the language that comes when the timpano has arrived for Christmas and leaves is hilarious. We all just want to be with Stanley Tucci and his family, obviously, but then all of his friends, I'm here, my work colleagues at the moment are my husband and my brother-in-law, and as we heard, the dog. Stanley Tucci's work colleagues are people like Meryl Streep and Colin Firth. So there's another one when they're making Julie and Julia, where he's playing Meryl Streep's husband, Paul, and they are at the Deauville Film Festival, and they're being quite nonchalant. And the first thing that Stanley Tucci does whenever he goes anywhere is find all the local restaurants, and in they go, and they order a dish called andouillette, which they think sounds exciting, and they notice that everybody in the restaurant is sniggering. I'm not going to spoil it for you because you will be laughing out loud when you read this section, but I would just tell you that andouillette essentially resembles, and in some ways is, the part of a horse you would not want to eat, shall we say. So there's some serious stuff in here about, obviously, the loss of his first wife, and meeting his new wife, and then a very significant thing when he is diagnosed with cancer on his tongue, and he is faced with the idea that not only might he lose his livelihood, what he loves doing, which is being an actor, which requires him, of course, to speak, but also that the thing that gives his life shape and passion and love, namely food and taste and being able to eat. And he writes very beautifully about what that meant and how he coped with the idea of that. I suppose the final thing to say is I love the fact that he fell in love with his second wife, Emily Blunt, Felicity Blunt, because he was working with Emily Blunt, who is Felicity's sister. But the key moment was not just being introduced to her and this beautiful woman and all of these kind of things. Of course, that all of these things are true, but that when they have gone out for a meal and they have had a big meal, the tasting menu, and Stanley Tucci feels at this moment that he will never eat again. It's, for those of you who know Monty Python, it's the wafer thin mint moment, at which point the cheese trolley comes into view and Felicity says, "Oh good, cheese." And at that point, he knew that he had found the woman for him. The final thing is, you may not know, oh, you will know this. There are also recipes for cocktails. Stanley Tucci is a big cocktail maker. Some of you will have known that during lockdown, his wife filmed him. All he was doing was making a Negroni. His wife filmed him making a Negroni and put the 2-minute film on Instagram. It broke the internet and Instagram, ladies and gentlemen, and so all you need to know is that recipe, the core blimey recipe for making a Negroni, is in this book. It is the perfect Christmas present. You will laugh out loud, you will cry, you will start to rush to the kitchen to make all of these dishes, and I can't tell you anything more other than, in the spirit of the very funny nature and lightness of this book, he's very self-deprecating, very funny, it somehow is extremely, I suppose, appropriate that this book is published by an imprint of Penguin, which is called Fig Tree. So, that is it for December's Mosse on a Monday. I am, as I said, going to be sneaking in a Christmas special, so come onto the channel and I'll post the details of that when we've got them. I'll be back again for the next Mosse on a Monday, which will be January the 3rd. It will be 4 o'clock, same time, same place. Books to inspire and get us into 2022, because a lot of us have had enough of 2021. But for now, thank you for joining me, thank you for staying, and whatever you do, don't forget, just keep reading. Bye for now.